Well, welcome everyone. I was so happy to see people joining us today after their workday on a Monday, on a blue Monday. And it shows your commitment to your students and your multilingual learners, that you're open to learning some new strategies and some tools to implement in the classroom. Today's is going to be, well, I guess to give it some context, I am working on some modules for the target audience is classroom teachers. As you know, our multilingual learner population has grown exponentially, which is a wonderful thing in the last few years. But teachers, particularly classroom teachers, may not have the tools or strategies that they need for reaching our multilingual learners. They may have done their teacher training prior to it being such a well, we might not have seen in Nova Scotia or anticipated that we'll be in this wonderful position that we're in today. So the audience for this was or will be, it's still in development, a classroom teacher, and particularly secondary. We know that in high school, teachers have such a limited amount of time with their students to be able to get them ready for post-secondary opportunities, whatever they may be. So this is the working module still in development on scaffolding. And the purpose is, the way it's set up, we'll do a little bit about why scaffolding is needed for language learners and different types of scaffolds that there are, as well as some strategies that teachers can use, or if you're an EAL specialist or support teacher, hopefully there's some things that you can take back to classroom teachers or help them implement into their practice. So some resources that I found really useful if you're hunkering down this winter and looking for some reading materials. There's a lot of ideas in long-term success for experienced multilingual learners. And this one's a sneaky one. It's basically all about scaffolding, but it's not in the title. We have, Pauline Gibbons from Australia does a lot of work on scaffolding. So some of her ideas are used in this presentation today. And another one I found useful was culturally responsive design, the UDL approach. And if you're limited on time, skip to the back half of the book. It's about the practical implementation and not so theory-based. So those are some resources that I will be borrowing from in this curated presentation. Now, so the goal today is to give you some ideas, some strategies to help connect your learners to the curriculum, the grade level curriculum, kind of help them get engaged in the classroom. But on that note, I guess what I don't want to happen is that you're overwhelmed. I'll be throwing a lot of different ideas, different things that may or may not work in your context. So it'll be a lot of things, and most of all, if these are brand new, or you're thinking like, well, I haven't implemented any of that, or I haven't seen, or I haven't had the opportunity to develop those kinds of things. Don't feel bad about that. Just hopefully you'll find something today that you can use moving forward. And just the reason I say that is I don't want it to feel like I'm throwing another spinning plate at you. We know classroom teachers have lots of plates in the air between UDL, CRT, inquiry-based learning, and then the regular classroom management. There's lots of things going on, and there's a big disconnect between, the job expectations and what might actually be possible. So hopefully you'll find something today that is possible for your context. All right. So we are going to look a little bit first at, BICS and KELP. So if you're not a language teacher or EAL specialist teacher, BICS is something that we talk about quite a bit. It's just those interpersonal skills, and those tend to develop first for our multilingual learners. They're socially motivated. Kids tend to be socially motivated. They want to talk to the other kids in their class. So that, of course, develops first. It's a survival type language, and it usually takes about 1 to 2 years to master. The second type of language that we see in schools is the acronym CALP. And this is all Jim Cummings' work from Toronto. So that's the cognitive academic language proficiency. So that's the ability to apply the written and oral language skills at a level that results in success in school. And that takes longer to develop, 5 to 8 years on average. If someone has limited literacy in their first language, however, it could take much longer, possibly 10 years or more sometimes. The reason why I'm giving you this background information today is because teachers are often misled when a student has mastered the BICS, the basic interpersonal communication skills. They can be fooled by the student who seems to be pretty social and gregarious and may even speak like a naturalized Canadian. It takes, because of that time it takes for the academic language proficiency, we can sometimes be misled and think, well, you know, they're just not paying attention, or they're not putting their best foot forward when the results aren't there in their grades or in their classwork. It's not a lack of effort or ability, and sometimes that BICS can be tricky. That student may just be parroting their peers. They may not even have a full understanding of the language they're using socially. Another difference is that your naturalized Canadian students have more of a cultural context to build on. If someone new to the country, they may not have the same experience, well, in English in school to serve as a foundation, to add those other components of language on, those more academic styles of speaking or reading. Whereas their Canadian counterparts who have been here for many years or have grown up here as a toddler, they have more of a stronger foundation with the English language on which to build those academic ideas. Another thing to be aware of is that cultures do schooling differently, or they have different values or different uses for reading. Some don't read for relaxation or interest, where that is a big, picture books and reading is a big business for our North American kids. They may have more access to literacy or to different type of media that can help them build their academic language. All right. Now, on top of those things I just mentioned, our EAL learners are always playing catch up. So they are always lagging a little bit behind because the curriculum is designed to advance for native English speakers. So if you're trying to develop your language skills and the academics are progressing and getting more challenging, it is kind of a compounded learning experience for our EAL learners or multilingual learners. It's a moving target that they're trying to catch up with. It takes more time. Just a little mention about two types of academic vocabulary, or ways of teaching academic vocabulary. We do it directly with the conscious effort to learn new vocabulary, either isolated or in context. And then it also happens indirectly. Incidental acquisition, new words coming through reading and listening, which the English speaker or the native English speaker is at an advantage for that indirect vocabulary teaching with the exposure that they've had to different literacy experiences and the time that they've spent in the language and in English instruction school. So direct vocabulary teaching is actually a scaffold that we'll be talking about later to kind of bridge that gap between those vocabulary words that their classmates may already know and the ones they need to be successful in that content area. Okay. Now these first slides I may go through a little quickly just because it's giving some background. I know a lot of you are EAL specialists, so we may not need to spend too much time on this. These are just two well-known strategies I see the formatting is not ideal on this for acquiring or for teaching academic vocabulary. So one way is, or the Marzano research shows that interacting with new vocabulary words is important. Practicing that word in multiple contexts. So repetition, and even to the point of redundancy, may feel redundant to you, but it's really, really beneficial to our multilingual learners. And then they internalize the words once they have them in those multiple contexts and apply them in relevant ways. So another way to teach academic vocabulary is for the teacher to provide a description, an explanation, and an example. The students then restate in your own words. We always hear that in school, in your own words. That's because it's a learning strategy. Then students create a non-linguistic representation, a visual, a sketch, a doodle. And then they do activities that help them add to their knowledge of the vocabulary terms. And one of those activities should be discussing the terms with each other. So some kind of collaborative activity where those new vocabulary words will come up. And playing a game, gamification is a really useful strategy when we're acquiring new vocabulary. So one thing that you may hear in language and in language acquisition is content and language integrated learning. So you'll hear the acronym CLIL quite often. And that is basically the integrative approach of teaching language at the same time you're teaching content. So moving away from that idea of having to learn or attain a certain level of English before working on the content concepts. So the CLIL classroom is really how, when students learn the subjects of their peers or the grade level subjects and English simultaneously. All right. Now, we're looking to really get the message, the idea to all teachers. Particularly, this is something that's been understood for quite some time by an elementary classroom teacher. But sometimes high school teachers still have the idea where the system is so compartmentalized, even in the way that you have two teachable subjects, or you have a science department, you have a math department. They tend to maybe have the idea that language is taught by the English teachers. I am responsible for the mathematics, or I'm responsible for the history. And we're really trying to change that mindset and get the understanding out there that every teacher, when it comes to newcomers and when it comes to multilingual learners, is responsible for teaching language. They're meant to facilitate the acquisition of social language by facilitating conversation, organizing groups, having partner work, and also the content or the subject that is their area of expertise. So they are responsible for the language of math or the language of science. So in science, an example of that would be the language we use in reporting things, or language arts, inferencing or inferring. These little language domains of their subject. And social studies, you'll probably speak a lot in the past tense. So that's an opportunity to integrate language goals and the regular outcomes of your content area. Oh, goodness, I might have to skip. Okay, so basically, the idea is this is a benefit to all students. A linguistically diverse classroom that is language rich is good for everybody. And because we know it takes 5 to 8 years to learn a language, there's no time for our kids to take 5 years out of their life or their school career to learn English and then go into learning the content or academic areas. To learn both at the same time is just more effective, more efficient. Now, in language-rich classrooms, you've heard that term before. This is when we speak about scaffolding. It is a scaffold to have a lot of visuals and posters and prompts on your walls. And often the first thing people think of is that the fire marshal is not going to like me having, they hardly like things on the bulletin board. They're not going to love having the walls covered. But I mean, you do what you can. What's best for your students. You can always take them down, put them up when as needed. But that environment full of just supports. These environmental clues are really, really important for supporting multilingual students, because when they don't speak or understand the language yet, they're looking to the environment and they're looking at you and they're looking at their classmates. They're reading your expressions, they're reading your body language when they don't understand what you're saying. They're looking for gestures or emotional style clues. And in the environment, they're reading the room. They're literally reading the room when they're sitting there, looking for context, looking for clues to help them understand what's happening. And one thing that's worth mentioning here is that give them some sentence starters or some phrases, or let them know that culturally it's okay for you to stop the teacher when you don't understand. It's okay in our classrooms to self-advocate when you are lost. So giving them a few phrases to hang on to, like, excuse me, I'd like to ask something, or did you say, or sorry for interrupting. These are survival phrases that could be really useful. Otherwise, through the kind of the hidden curriculum, what they'll learn to do is just sit there and be quiet. And that happens a lot. That can happen when you're not sure of the classroom culture, or it's different from your past classroom experiences. It may be helpful for students to know that that's a cultural norm here. Okay. So word walls, classroom walls, having supportive reading materials, visual representations, all very useful scaffolds. Oh, great. Section 1 done on time. Now I'm just going to come back to you here. As you know, I can't see you until I switch the... There we go. So at this point, that's a little background of the context. The next section will be about different types of scaffolds. But as chunking is a scaffold, I'd like to stop and maybe do a little check-in if anybody has any questions, or if I'm speaking a little too quickly, let me know. You could give a thumbs up, thumbs down. I know it's recorded. Maybe you don't want to interject, but I'm just going to pause here. Aaron's good. Oh, there was a hand up. Trying to find the thumbs up. Okay, great. And that is also, if you haven't, perfect. Yes, I will absolutely say this. And I will, because I know how limited your time is, I would never just promote any old resource. So I will give you the titles of ones that are worth your while and are really good kind of reads and are on the approved reading list that Peru has. Okay, great. Seeing lots of thumbs up. And that's a little participation technique that you use in your classroom, I'm sure. Like, how are we doing? Thumbs up, not sure, thumbs down. And but when using hand gestures, remember there's also sometimes a cultural connotation to those that you might have to sort out first. Okay, section 2. I'm going to share my screen. One sec. Right. Okay. Section 2 of our scaffolding module has some, I think this is my favorite part. So in case you haven't heard of scaffolding, or you're sitting there saying, like, for example, what is scaffolding? It's not just another word for help. It's not just an adaptation. It's future oriented, so it's temporary. So this is always if you can't do it independently yet, it's always that important word yet. We have these supports in place that are temporary, but you will get it. Now it's a bit of a tricky dance because removing scaffolds prematurely can lead to disengagement or frustration with the material, but leaving them in place, it breeds dependence and kind of a bit of a learned helplessness. So it is a tricky balance. Okay, so there's some theory behind it. Basically, it bridges the space between what a learner can do independently and what a learner can do with the support of the teacher or a very capable peer. Now, what we're looking to do when we're scaffolding is creating comprehensible input, taking the material and changing it, molding it, allowing the learner to be able to intake that information. And that's an idea from Krissy and his belief, and not everybody believes it, I do, that receptive learning always it comes before expressive or productive language. So listening and reading comes before speaking and writing. You'll understand, your learners likely understand quite a bit, even if they don't yet speak. So those respective parts of language often come before, I think always come before their ability to produce the language. All right. Now, we always, again, want to approach it with the idea of high expectations. So hopefully changing our instruction, but keeping the same kind of expectations that we have for our other learners. Our categories of scaffolds, so different types of scaffolds. A big one, and this one you probably have heard a lot with culturally relevant teaching or CRP, is the background. So building or tying this new information to students' experiences or practices, and that lets them anchor the new information to ideas that already exist in their head. Sensory inputs, you probably think of this one immediately, those visuals, things that are real, manipulatives, things that they can touch. Graphic, so communicating information through a visual like a graph or a bar graph or even a chart. Interactive, so processing information through social interaction, using those peer supports, especially if you're in an area where you're fortunate enough to have a learner in the same classroom that speaks that same first language. That's a huge scaffold for a lot of our students. And linguistic scaffold, that's a pretty big area because our system is still very, very focused on literacy-based learning. We need to manipulate the language, the spoken and written language, to make it a comprehensible input for our newcomer students. So that's actually the next section all on its own, some ideas to manipulate or amplify our language. So let's give some examples. Background. So when you think about activating prior knowledge or building upon students' background, think about how things might connect to the students themselves. What belongings do they have that connect with this? Where might they have seen this before, this concept before in their lives? How does it affect their lives? Does it relate to any of your students' hobbies or interests? It's always nice to do a little, and it's in our intake assessment binder now, a little inventory of the things students like to do. If they can't tell you, you can kind of, this personal interest inventory is like a little catalog, like they point to things that they find interesting or they enjoy doing. So if you have that at the beginning of your course or beginning of the school year, that's really valuable to creating scaffolds that tap into background information. And how does this concept show up in the school community? How is it experienced by, maybe it could be the neighborhood, this part of the country, or their old country? And then the world, maybe you can connect it to pop culture or to their own culture, historical events, recent world events, anything that you can find as a link to build that schema, that information building. All right. Sensory. So this one is just broken up into manipulatives, basically, and what those might look like in different classrooms. Algebra tiles, lab equipment, all of those things. Anything that someone can touch or see, anything three-dimensional is really, really helpful. And these are the graphics that we spoke about, a labeled diagram. Timeline is nice for like the plot of a story or for something in social studies. And the scaffold of interaction and collaboration is huge, as you know. It taps into both language domains. The basic interpersonal conversation skills, they form friendships, they learn how to speak the way the kids speak, to talk with their peers, and if it's a structured class activity, they get that CALP, that academic language proficiency. So some learners who are either native English speakers or a higher level of English, they'll use those vocabulary words that you introduced for the activity, and it lends to that repetition that the new learners require to internalize that vocabulary. And kids, there's lots of studies there. Like kids really prefer, I mean, not everybody, they find it really engaging and motivating when they're doing group work or when they're able to socialize a little bit within the classroom. And that's some things that, like I don't know what 12-year-olds talk about anymore, or 16-year-olds. So that's something I really can't teach them. And that's something only their peers really can support them with. Okay. And we use collaboration with other scaffolds as well. So collaboration could be in play while you also have sentence stems or visuals. You use multiple scaffolds at a time. And two of the most commonly used ones in the classroom, I find, are like think, pair, share. That's a scaffold, and jigsaw activities. And I think you know think, pair, share, and jigsaw activities. It's always helpful when you organize an activity where each member has a different responsibility, so that they must contribute, whether they may even be the illustrator or something. If everybody has a different role or task, it kind of makes them reliant on each other. Okay. So you also want to reduce the anxiety. If you don't have a big vocabulary, or you're very a beginner at, I'm just gonna flip back one, make sure I didn't miss a slide. If you're a beginner English speaker, it's really helpful to have a little script, maybe some sentence stems or something written down, or something that you could put a poster on the wall to help you contribute to the conversation and to help set them up for success. If you maybe think back to yourself back in core French, or if you were ever in a language learning scenario, it sure was comforting to have a little prompt of what you can say to your partner or to the group, or how you can contribute when you don't necessarily have the ability yet to generate original sentences. So you can give them something like an example of, or something with fill in the blanks where they just add the information. Ooh, all right, we're on fire. So I'll stop sharing that one. So those are some different types of scaffolds where you might even be thinking like, oh, well, yeah, we do that all the time. Or of course, I put up some sentence starters for conversations or establish group norms before going into that group work. One thing also is with the group work, just also be mindful that structured and organized is really key for our multilingual or newcomer students. Instead of just, okay, everybody find a partner, or everybody, the couple people next to you. It's really, that can be really intimidating. You kind of would like to mindfully choose a member of the class who is compassionate or helpful, or of course an L1 speaker. The same L1 speaker would be really beneficial. So those are some different types of scaffolds, and I believe we're looking at the linguistic scaffolds next, so restructuring that language. So I guess at the moment, a little check-in if anybody needs something clarified, or if I zoomed over an idea too quickly. I'll give you a couple of seconds to. Okay, great. Oh, thumbs up, Maud. All right. Oh, so Erin, I always, when I was in supporting classrooms, I don't think I said this at the top of the presentation. I'm a secondary teacher, a secondary classroom teacher, and then a resource teacher. And then the last, this is my 9th year in the field of EAL. And that was always, and I'm only doing this temporarily, and that was always a question that classroom teachers would say. They'd be like, should I put all of the, in our Halifax schools, we do have often the luxury of having the same L1 in a classroom. So I would always get the question, should I put them all together? Like, should I put all the Korean speaking students together in a group, or should I mix them with the other students? And basically the answer to that is both. Both are good strategies depending on what your goal or what the activity is. So if it's a new topic and you're trying to generate that background information, it would be really nice to have that those similar language students together, and then they talk about it. It's like, what's your understanding of this, or what do you know about this, or does this remind you of anything from what we talked about back in Korea? So they can have that background conversation, building up their knowledge of the topic in their L1. But if the topic is not new and you want to introduce new vocabulary, it will be really nice to, again, have that structured, mindful group design or setup where. So yeah, Wendy, so I would, if they have different L1s, there's not necessarily a benefit to them building background information together. You may want to jump to putting them into different groups with supportive peers or with English speaking students. And then when they hear those conversations in the group work, they'll hear the vocabulary, the gestures. Using that vocabulary in context in the classroom would be very, very helpful for them. Oh, Jane, the intake binder is the when a newcomer student arrives, the EAL teacher does a language assessment, and in that intake binder, they find out some background information about the student, and of course a lot about their language, what kind of vocabulary they already have in place, what their past experience in school was, because we know a literacy learner is different than somebody who already, so a learner that's had interrupted learning in their education, which tends to be a refugee type learner, that's a different learner. That's a different learning profile than someone coming from an educational background with no interrupted learning. They have fine literacy skills. They have a foundation of math. It is a different learning profile. And that will be discovered going back to the intake binder that the EAL teachers use. They do this assessment. So it should be with the EAL specialist that is connected to your school. Yeah, there should be an EAL, and throughout the province, there's in every region of the province, there is an EAL specialist. So this allows them, and there is a report generated from it, which, and I can't speak to other regions. I'm not sure how it's communicated to the classroom teachers in all regions at the moment. It might be electronically, it might be in a conference with the specialist teacher. But when a newcomer arrives, that EAL specialist teacher does have this information about whether they are a pre-beginner, a beginner, intermediate, advanced, or fluent, based on these descriptors that are in the assessment. So my recommendation would be to find out, if you don't know, who the EAL specialist is for your school, and have a conversation with them, shoot them an email. I'd love to chat about this student, or do you have anything, can you give me a little learning profile for this student? Okay, we're making good time, and we'll head back to sharing my screen. You're welcome. Part 3. Okay. Here we go. From the beginning. Take it from the top. Okay, so linguistic scaffolds, of course, is where you'll probably might take the most energy in terms of scaffolding for your learners. And one thing that, in keeping the growth mindset, one thing that's important is, again, thinking about scaffolding. It's temporary, it's support, but it's not simplified or watered down content. We would like to keep those high expectations. So when you're modifying or amplifying, we like to use the words into everyday language. What a really good practice is to not rob the student of that academic language. Leave that academic language in place, and then kind of shadow it with the everyday language. So again, another reason why academic language takes longer is because in many homes, it's not used. You use it in school. You use it in very specific context. But everyday language, as part of society in life, we use that every single day, and we have more opportunities to practice it. So what's really nice is almost like a dual language text. If you could leave the academic in place and also amplify that language with the everyday language. And you can put, well, maybe these should have been the same color, but you can put like stereotypical in pink and also common in pink to show that those are synonyms. They're just in two different registers, or they're in two different styles of English. Translating or translanguaging is not, I've run into the idea from some teachers that maybe they felt that it wasn't fair if a student used a translator on an assessment. But we need to kind of get the idea in our mind that it's a strengths-based approach. It's allowing a student or encouraging a student to use their entire language repertoire. So they have a language, they came to you with a language repertoire and life experiences and some foundation or bank of language and language skills. So English is adding to those. It's going in, it's filling that bucket even more. And the idea of them being allowed to use a translator, filter things through their first languages, that's using their first language as an asset. So the days of this is an English only environment, or English only, that we're not going in that direction anymore. We're using all language that a student has available to them in the classroom, and encouraging them to do that. Yeah, we're moving away from it can do some damage if we position English as the superior and more valued language in school. Another word that, if you're not a language teacher, that you may not have heard before is cognates. This often comes up in different resources about language learning. And that is because, so Spanish, French, those languages that are Latin-based, there's going to be quite a bit of vocabulary that sounds similar to some English words. It might have the same meaning, or yeah, it has the same meaning, but you can almost tell, just based on that word, oh, that's similar to English. Now, a lot of the research comes out of the States, where most of their, or vast majority of their second language learners are Spanish. So there is a great deal more overlap between Spanish and English than there is, for example, English and traditional Chinese or Arabic. So they promote that strategy quite a bit, looking for similarities between vocabulary and between styles of language. But depending on your learners, may work well if you have some Portuguese learners, works well for FSL. It may not be the one that you choose the most when it comes to a linguistic scaffold in our context, from my experience. Okay, so time to process. We kind of really need. It is exhausting to if you were maybe a French immersion student, or if you ever were in maybe you taught overseas, or if you were in a context where you weren't using your first language. It is very tiring to have, because you have to focus. It's almost like driving on a long trip. Like you're even though you're just sitting there driving the car, it's mentally exhausting at the end of the trip. And that's kind of similar to sitting all day in school trying to process everything or filter it through that language foundation that you already have. So filtering things through your L1, it takes time and it takes energy. So just being mindful of that when we're teaching our multilingual learners, having some intentional breaks, especially when you're introducing a concept that is multiple parts, and it can be like an engaging break. Like introduce a little bit of information and say, draw me a little sketch of what you think represents that, or turn to your partner and just summarize what we just talked about, or have a little Google form and be like, oh, here's a question, like, what did you get out of this? Or tell me one important thing that you took from this paragraph, just to give that little break to your student. And it's a good little formative assessment check-in. An annotated visual. So you have there's actually an app that does this. If you take a photo on your phone, and then it has a little option for you to type. And I don't have the name on the top of my head, but I can find it for you. And you just add a little arrow and the word, and it works with your photo library on your phone. So an annotated visual, just like it's a labeled diagram. If we were talking about, so maybe the students would recognize McDonald Bridge, talking about background. And it's really useful for things that you can't see, like tension or like democracy. Well, these are the chords. there's tension on the cord. So something like that, if you had an important handout or concept that you really wanted the students to get, it may be worth putting together a little visual that's labeled. Now, text engineering, and I know you're like, this is something that of course would take time. Maybe it's something that you could collaborate with other teachers and take turns, maybe engineering a text, a handout that you have been designing or making for your class. Again, it's not lost on me that these are things that might seem overwhelming at first, like what? Because it is work and it is time. But if you do maybe for one handout a unit, or you do it for, and then you'll have it, especially if you have the luxury of the same teaching assignment for a couple of years. So when you engineer the text, you're embedding some supports in the text without watering it down. And you keep the academic vocabulary in place, and you put maybe the more accessible vocabulary behind it. Put a little synonym beside, or a friendly word beside the more challenging word. Glossing is what it sounds like. It's a glossary, and this has been found to be an effective tool. Except that it's not at the back. It's in a little text box right there on the page. If you have beginner or pre-beginner students, it would be a translation. The little glossary would be this word means, and whatever the translation is in their first language. But if they're intermediate level or above, they benefit from that little glossary, that little text box on the page, being in everyday language. So academic language, everyday, familiar language. Using headings, breaking up your information using a heading, kind of a little, this is what this is going to be about. Some context, and this is what it looks like. I'll just show you what it looks like. So you want to show a paragraph on Canadian democracy or the idea of democracy. Maybe there was a challenging academic word that they may not have heard before, and then you put the synonym. You use some headings. Restructured sentence would be, maybe there was a compound or a complex sentence that, and of course, the longer the sentence, the more confusing it's likely to be. The learner is more likely to get lost the longer the expression. So you can put a little restructured sentence, breaking it up. Whenever there's a good trick is, whenever there's a comma, make it a period, break it up into simple sentence structure. And the little glossary would be, glossary provides brief explanation. You put that right there on the page, or maybe a little embedded visual to help give them some context. Like, oh, okay, I see people are voting on something. All right. Modeling instruction. So when I think of this, and we know that it's the airtime per teacher should be kept short. Employing think alouds, I think about a cooking show, like when people were on, or when you had not a cooking competition like it is now, but in the past when someone had a cooking show, or there was a cooking segment on a daytime talk show, it was really visual and exaggerated. The person showed you products, they showed you they show how they were doing things. They did think alouds, they did like a stream of consciousness. It was kind of overacted a little bit. And that's what I think about when I think about modeling instructions, really making an overt, embellished bit of a demonstration of what the students are meant to do. So demonstrating every step, pointing, holding up, drawing attention to different things. That can be really, again, the student with limited language is reading you. They're reading your actions, they're reading your face. So that can be very helpful if you can chew up the scenery a little bit in your instruction. Now this, when we think about sentence lifting, if we ask students, and probably more towards intermediate students or at the high school level, if we're asking them to summarize or pull out the important information from a text, a strategy that you can put in place is, or it will require direct instruction, is, well, you would model pulling out the important pieces of information. So highlighting some things that are facts. And in this one, it's a little sentence or a little paragraph about Shakespeare. When? 16th century. What? He's a poet and playwright. So things that stand out as important information to them. And then they restructure it. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna have to move on. And then they restructure it, writing a sentence with each of those important pieces of information in it. And the summary kind of falls together for them. So I'll share some resources with you that I found to be some of the best ones, most practical ones that aren't too just theory-based, that is like, try this, try this, try this. And you can have a look at those in a time that works for you. So I did stop sharing my screen. Are you all looking at me or the screen?
We're looking at you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So there is another section on, how to scaffold to get information from the students. And of course that leads to assessment, which everybody wants something to speak to at assessment time. These modules, again, this is still in development, and there will be a series of modules. That's what I've been working on lately. There will be a series of modules targeted towards classroom teachers to give them some ideas, some support, some strategies that have been tried and tested. They will be forthcoming, and we're still figuring out what the vehicle for that will be. But it's clear that, you all are here after working. It's clear that there's an appetite or a need or something, like that people need this information. And we recognize, or I recognize, that a victim of the sub shortage and of the pandemic was quality PD. We haven't been putting out the PD that's maybe required for the demands of the classroom. That's something maybe that's a different webinar, maybe something that's not during dry January. So we're hoping to have some things implemented in the coming months. Leah McCoy.
Hi, I was just trying to turn on my camera so that you could see me. I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I found it super helpful, especially the information on, like, well, you had the categories of scaffolds, and then it was like application or implementation guidance or something with it. So I took some pictures of the slides. Hope that's okay. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'm glad it's you found something valuable. So that, yeah, we met one of our goals today, that you had a little takeaway of something that you think will be useful in your context. Yes. And we have I can follow up with an email from Peru's list to put some apps out there. And just a caveat on the apps, there is an approved app list. There's a regional one with apps and technology that your region supports, and there's one provincially that is supported by the province. So you might want to, before implementing it with students, just double check that it's okay by your region, by your employer. Oh, great. Oh, thank you, Dale. Oh, great, confirming. I love that. And Margaret Kenny, I see your question there. The slide deck. It's still in development, we have so we're going to get some feedback, and there's some referencing that still needs to be tidied up on it. So it's not quite ready to give out to you all, but we will be happy to when it's polished and ready to roll. It will be put out there for teachers to take from it what they can, what they will. Yeah. Okay. We'll follow up with the books I found useful on scaffolding, and some of those apps. I agree with you there with the photocopy budget, where we've moved towards engineering and creating tools that are responsive to the students in front of us, where it's all original things that we need to photocopy for the kids. Like, we don't use workbooks anymore. I agree with you with that photocopying comment. Especially so, like, even textbooks, we're kind of phasing those out as we move into the digital world. Okay. Well, I thank you for showing up online today. I really appreciate having an audience, and because this is a work in progress, would be happy for feedback if there was something that you noticed that didn't make sense, or you disagree with, or it's important to me. Like, teacher feedback and involvement is important to me. It's for you, and I would I want to put something useful and relevant out there. So yeah, happy to hear anything that you have insight on or might be more helpful for your context.